So I created this class called Applied Positive Neuroscience, basically because um, the like the head of the Department of Psychiatry was like, we should have class that like helps students, but while we know there are a lot of skills that students could learn that would help them, like we also need students to take the class. So in order to do that, it should satisfy some requirement they have, like for life sciences or something. So they asked me, like, can you make a class that's like helpful but also like sciencey? And that was basically what my book, The Upward Spiral, was about. So I was like, sure, I'll basically make a class out of that. And I taught it with like 25 students the first time, just like as a trial, and I was like sitting around a table, but it was mostly like me lecturing. But because it was like the first time I taught it, and they're sitting around a table, like it was like much more discussion, interactive. Then it sort of grew to like 100 students and like 200 students, and I realized like there were elements of the discussion, that I liked, but they're also parts of, no, I'm sort of like telling like a story, like a TED Talk kind of thing. And there's a certain sort of aspect of lecturing that's like a performance. And I realized that, like, because there's a lot of emphasis on like interactive discussion, and that's important. But there's also important that, like, well, you don't, if you go to, see stand-up comedy or you go hear a TED Talk, you find it really interesting and engaging, even though it's not interactive.
Interactive, correct.
And so that, I think some of the problems with lectures are just like professors don't know how to be engaging, or they're not charismatic in that way, or whatever. But that's like one of the things that I like about teaching. I think that's also harder over Zoom, because I've noticed that now, so I taught my class this time over Zoom, but it's like much harder to like be engaging and energetic, like when you're just talking to your computer.
Yeah.
So like, and it just takes a lot more effort. So that makes it difficult. But one of the things that I liked, just going back to like when the class got bigger, I was sort of like, okay, I have this sort of like story or like clear idea of the points I want to say, and like say it in an engaging way, and include some like, personal anecdotes. And it's also sort of easier for my class because it's mostly material that like the students are interested in. So like it's easier to get students engaged when you're like talking about how do you be happier, or whatever, like they're already interested. So I realized like, oh, maybe some of my style wouldn't work for a topic that was less, interesting.
Correct.
Although I think a lot of the challenge that a professor needs to have, which a lot of professors don't take up, is, well, you find it interesting as the professor. Like, why do you find it interesting? And if you can like reconnect with why you find it interesting, and make it relatable to the students' context of things that they're already interested in, whatever, like then topics can be much more interesting.
Correct.
Anyway, but the so for when it came time to switch to Zoom, I was like, well, I like having students be able to like raise their hand and like call in, because like I'm talking about something or whatever, and if like it's not the right time, like in the middle of a point, like I can just sort of ignore them. I can be like, oh yeah, 1 second, whatever, and like keep talking for another minute or two, and then like ask their question, and then so I would say most of my class was like me talking, but that and for some lectures, 30% of it would be like people raising their hands and me responding and clarifying. And some of them, maybe there weren't very many questions or whatever. But when it came time to go to Zoom, I was like, well, having, 200 people try and log in, and they're all, in different time zones, and, trying to do the presentation and whatever, answer questions, saying it's gonna be like too difficult. Cause like, you sort of have to, like it's much harder to answer questions when it's just like in a chat function.
Yes, exactly. Correct.
It's like, then you have to read it and process it and understand, like, there's so much more that's conveyed when someone asks a question and like how they ask it. And it's just like much faster communication, and like, and so it's much more awkward, I think, if you're trying to give a lecture and someone posts a question, then it's like get distracted from your lecture, and like it's just a bad experience.
Yeah, no, I 100% see that.
So I decided, and I talked with one of my friends who does a lot of event planning and organizes big events. And so she has to run these big meetings. She's running big meetings over Zoom, and she realized like there's always someone who like doesn't have their mic off and like all this stuff. And she realized it's just easier to just record the thing that she wants to do, and then people can just watch it. And so
asynchronous teaching.
Exactly. And so are
you a fan of that?
Decided to do what?
Are you a fan of that?
I think that it is very helpful for some information, because like if what you're trying to do is like, tell a story or be engaging or like just deliver information in that way, like that might be something that students want to rewatch. Wait, what? Like, let me explain that again. Or like you could just have a transcript, or like I have stories that I want to tell about this thing, and it's like, tell you and listen and whatever. And it's like there's not an interactive element to that. It's like me telling a story so that you understand why the information is relevant. Like, I have this friend who, he used to weigh 600 pounds and blah, blah, blah. Like, that's interesting. What happened? And then I can tell you about like some science and whatever, and it's informative or whatever. And then people are like, might want to clarify. But there are parts of that that are like sort of really well suited to asynchronous learning, in the same way that a TED Talk, like you just watch a TED Talk and you'd be like, that's, really interesting and cool.
Yeah.
But
interesting.
The other element of this class is like, I don't think it would be good if it was only, lecture recorded videos.
That's Coursera.
Right, exactly. And they have a weekly discussion section that's run by the TA, and that's 30 people. And so I had the TAs like do it synchronously, so that students could log on, and then the TA talks about something, and then she breaks them up into breakout sessions, or like you talk about a topic of like, one of the things we did in this class also to make it more interactive, and this was interactive, but this was before the Zoom, even this was just part of the class, is that every day we have them like record their mood, and a few other, like, how'd you sleep last night, how are you feeling, blah blah blah. And
how would they submit this?
There was an app that they did that before, but it's not like FERPA education compliant. So this quarter, I just have them do it through Google Forms, like through the UCLA secure Google Forms. And it, but part of like their participation in the class was like a lecture about something, but then I would give them like an assignment to like go exercise this week, or to go meditate, and like you have to do meditate on 3 days or something.
Mm-hmm.
So they're just like, it's essentially a scientific experiment that they're running on themselves, where they collect data about themselves every day, but like on Monday they meditate, and on Tuesday they don't, and Wednesday they meditate, and whatever, like. And so we're teaching them about science, and they're doing this, like we're collecting data and doing an intervention on themselves. And so at the discussion section, part of the discussion is like, so like, what'd you hypothesize,
What happened and what happened?
And then because I had them all collecting the data, like I can create a graph, and I just wrote like an R, script to like compile it all and show them like, well, this is what the average class data looks like.
Mm-hmm.
And then you can sort of facilitate discussion. And I just realized like you can sort of do this independently of them collecting data. Like the general concept of like, well, this is, you have everyone answer a question or a vote on something, whatever. Like you can just show them the class results. And by just sort of having like data that's like a result, like something that they're connected to because, well, they participated in the class results.
Mm-hmm.
But then it can facilitate discussion because you can be like, well, who agrees with the class results, or whose individual, was similar to this. Mm-hmm. And someone will be like, oh, well, I voted yes. Or, in my case, it's like, oh, we showed that exercise improved mood. And I'm like, oh, well, did anyone have similar, hypothesis and similar results? And you're like, oh, yeah. Well, I was surprised, blah, blah, blah. And they can just talk about their experience.
Yeah.
Everyone's like, oh. And then, well, does anyone else did their data look different? And someone's like, oh, like, it's funny. One of the students in my class was like telling me, she's like, I think I'm doing the analysis wrong or the intervention wrong, because I found that exercise makes my mood worse. And I was like, oh, that's interesting. Like, do you get a lot of exercise or not much? And she's like, oh yeah, I exercise like every day because I'm a varsity athlete.
Of course.
I was like, oh, you exercise every day.
So
she's like, oh, well, not. I was like, maybe you're getting too much exercise. Mm-hmm. And she's like, well, I don't exercise every day. Like we, I only when we have workouts. And I was like, well, when don't you have workouts? And she's like, oh, on the weekend. Mm-hmm. And I was like, oh, well, what you think is your data telling you that you're less happy when you exercise is actually your data telling you you're more happy on the weekend. Yeah. And I was like, that's called a confounding variable. So like, but just having data, like, even if it's not scientifically connected, like just allows you to present something that is interesting, and then it can sort of
make interconnections for them.
Yeah. Right. And so like, I mean, for me, it was important just in the general class of like, okay, I talk about this stuff in lecture, mm-hmm. and then I'm going to make you do it. Mm-hmm. Like I'm going to have a lecture on exercise, and then you're going to have to exercise. So that improves engagement, because that's not something that's in the classroom per se, but like it's something that they're learning about, and then something that I'm making them do to practice it. And so like there's an academic understanding, and then there's an experiential understanding. And then the discussion section is about like talking about that and sort of connecting your, academic understanding with your experiential understanding.
I can see why your classes are so interesting.
Yeah, well, thank you. And then the other thing, like, the discussion section is also answering questions, but it's also, small breakout groups where they just, talk to each other so they feel connected to the other students. Because one of the things I realized about a class is that a big bonus of a class is that you're maybe interested in this thing, but you get to interact with other people who are also interested in the same thing and going through the same experience as you.
But maybe in a slightly different way. And that's how you like expand your learning.
Oh, right. That's true too. Right. They may not bring the exact same thing, but like you all you have some shared experience.
Correct.
And that makes you feel connected, makes you feel good, more engaged. And when you're doing Coursera, like you might find the material really engaging, but like there's no connection with anyone.
There's no social
And
part.
yeah, so like I did a Coursera class on like R programming because my friend was like, hey, I want to learn you want to take it? And I was like, sure. So like we already had a connection, we're doing it together. So like, we brought that to it, and it made it more interesting.
So the fact that you did it with a friend was just more engaging for you.
Yeah, because when you talk to them, you're like, oh, have you watched lecture 3 yet? And you're like, oh no, or like I'm confused about like just because just having someone else do it to talk to, even if they're equally as uninformed as you, like you learn from the other students, because what they are confused about is something different usually than what you're confused about.
Correct. Like the lowest common denominator.
What?
It's the lowest common denominator.
Yeah. So I mean, like they might have more of a background in biology, and so they understood this part, and you might have more of, and like so you understand different things, and so you can sort of help each other.
Correct.
And
can we can I do one thing? Let's take one step back. Tell me how your classes are structured. Like you're taking a class for 200 students? That's crazy big.
I mean, it's not that big. Sorry, 1 second. Okay. What was I gonna say? Like it's a big lecture. So like
and it's a semester long thing, or it's a quarter long?
It's a quarter.
It's a quarter.
But I mean, even at Brown, which is like much smaller than UCLA, like I took a computer science class, probably had 150, and I took a intro to neuroscience, that was probably 300, and political science. You never took any large lectures?
I didn't do my undergrad in the US. So my experiences in grad school, and grad schools are typically smaller.
Right. So grad school, because you're taking a class with
correct.
Just the other people in the 10
who
other people
are actually 100% interested and doing the same thing, versus like in undergrad it's more like a wider.
Right. That's one of the problems with undergrad, is that you're like all of the people in the class aren't necessarily interested in being there.
Super present.
It's a requirement.
And is it fair to say that as you start, like let's say a 101 class gets you interested, like a survey class gets you interested, and then if you start like following that path down, then the number of students keep getting smaller and smaller?
Generally, yes. Right.
Okay.
Yeah. So there are like the biggest classes are like the lower division introductory, like intro to psychology, or intro biology or chemistry or whatever, like these things that some of them that might be a required class for like a bunch of different majors. Maybe you're super interested in chemistry, but maybe you're interested in biology, but you have to take a chemistry class or whatever.
Interesting. So there's almost like the difference between a choice being made for you and a choice you making.
Right. And so I realized I wouldn't necessarily like to teach most classes. Like I wouldn't want to teach a class where half the students weren't really that interested in being there. So my class is great because it's like it does fulfill a requirement, but like there are tons of other classes. You just have to pick some life sciences class, and so
the ones that come to you are the ones who have chosen.
Right. Exactly. So, and that makes a big difference. And like one of the things I learned about like online learning is I also started teaching a course just for regular people, because I was like, oh, I'm teaching it at UCLA over Zoom. Like, why don't I just there's going to be people in the community and be like, oh, I'll teach a class, and I call it the Upward Spiral Core Program. And I was like, oh, I don't need to teach the whole class, because there's some parts of it that are like aren't that relevant and just whatever. So like I just sort of condensed it down. But like the people who are really interested and motivated to take a class will find everything that you say interesting.
Yep.
So like I only have like 7 people, signed up or whatever, but I record the videos. It's basically structured similarly to my UCLA class.
Mhm.
But like I know that like they are similar to the UCLA students in that like they're really interested. I mean, they paid, hundreds of dollars to like hear me and see what I have to say. So like they're really interested. Whereas and so it's like really low, production. It's just like me with some slide, talking in front of some slides, but like that's what they want to hear. Whereas if you, maybe wanted to expand it more, then, the people who are like kind of interested in it, well, you need to maybe do more to get them more engaged.
I see what you mean.
But the
So it's
people who are
almost like,
already super excited,
yeah,
you don't need to get them more excited.
it's like a levels of students. Like if you have 100 students, like maybe 20% are super interested, 30% are like on the line. Like if this professor is good, they'll probably switch into like being really interested. Then there's
Right.
30% who are like just there, and 20% who just don't want to even be there, but they're
Sure.
there.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Right.
And it's like you want to optimize your experience for the top 50% because they're the ones who are getting the most out of it.
Yeah.
And also those are the people that that give professors joy. Like teaching is also like a joyful experience, right? Like when you teach somebody,
Right.
like,
And that's what Zoom is problematic, because like I don't know if you watch any like late night TV talk shows or anything, but like the Daily Show or Stephen Colbert or something, like they're usually perform in front of a live studio audience, and now they're like at home with a camera, and I realized like, oh wow, that's really difficult.
yeah,
Like
I know
you're
what
trying
you
to
mean.
be funny and whatever and energetic, and it's like, but you're just talking to no one. And and it's like that's exhausting. Whereas if you were, talking in front of people, even if people aren't asking questions, like you hear when they laugh, or you feel like it just feels much more immediate feedback, and people, after the lecture, like, oh, thank you, or when like even just like little small things, interactions. And so like getting
You're
that sort of
feeding off
feedback.
their energy essentially.
Yeah, exactly. And that's
So
very hard to do over
yeah,
Zoom, even if it's synchronous. And so that's
yeah,
why I'm like, screw it, I'll just do it asynchronous.
correct. How many TAs do you have?
Uh, there are 6 TAs.
And all of them have the same kind of overall jobs, or you've divided them up so that some are
They all have the
doing breakout?
same. They all have the same job. So like, some of them teach one section, some of them lead 2 sections, but they all have the same job, and
Which
we
is?
sort of to lead section and to do the grading.
So
And
grading and assignments, and then I'm assuming the discussion rooms as well.
right, so the discussion section is like 30 students, and so they run the
Oh,
discussion
that's what you
section.
meant by leading a section.
Yeah, so they lead the section. They're like, so, here's the data from this week, whatever, and they ask people, and they're like, okay, and now we're gonna, break out into small groups, and you click, in Zoom, you're gonna break out things, and now like they lead, now we're gonna do deep breathing exercise, or whatever. Like you lead activities in discussion, you talk about things, you answer questions.
Yeah,
That's what they do, and then they also grade the weekly assignments and
I see.
have
Is
office
there
hours.
any like if like a certain section does better than another section, like how much of that is on the TA versus just having a better set of students? And do you like bring that up as something that you're judging them on?
I don't.
Okay.
Like,
Would you if you could?
I think it'd be really interesting to see like how like the some students did, like some section did better on the exam versus another section, but also like since we have collecting data on like how happy they are or whatever, I could see like, oh, are some but like it's really noisy and complex data. Like it would be very interesting to analyze. It's just like, even though it's 200 students, like that's not that much
Yeah.
data in that there's like so many other variables like
Yeah, it's not a
that
clean
aren't
experiment. It's not an
right,
RCT.
right. And exactly. And so that's like some of the things I'm like, well, it'd be sort of cool to look at, but like, is it informative enough that I would do something different?
Yeah,
Uh, so,
that's interesting.
so that's
You,
why.
yeah,
But like
you.
one of the things that's interesting, yeah.
Mhm. Please go on. Please go on.
Oh no, just like it's interesting to see like to show them like, oh, when I tell them to exercise, is that helpful? And they're like, yep, we can show them like, yep, their mood improves by 10% or whatever. Uh, but like just as far as like leading a class with a bunch of TAs, it's generally not helpful, I think, to give the TAs
A grade.
critical feedback. Right. Like,
Yeah.
unless I am like, because what's most important for the TAs, I think, is that they are motivated. So, like, maybe if their students weren't doing as well in the test, like, that's less relevant than, like, why aren't they doing as well in the test? Like, is it because the TA isn't that engaging or excited, or is it because the TA doesn't understand the information, or is it the TA isn't answering the questions? But like, you know, each TA has 30 students, and like, I mean, I haven't looked at the data, but I can't imagine that the average test scores are going to vary that
Yeah.
much. But like, if you have, it's also not, it's like also not the hardest class. So
Yeah.
like the
Yeah. That's
average on
true
the
too.
exam is like 85.
Yeah.
So if you have a couple students, you know, you have a couple students, you know, from the football team or whatever, not to like who are in your section and they got a 50, well, like they're gonna bring your average down.
Yeah.
Is
Yeah.
that
That's true.
relevant or meaningful that, you know, your average is at 82 and some other TA is 87? Well,
Not
like
really. I
probably
see
not.
what you mean.
And so
I
like
see what you
there's so much variability that you know, maybe if you had the same TAs for a few section, or
mean.
you
Mm-hmm.
um, could yeah had more students or something, then it
It
might
would be
be
interesting.
useful.
Yeah. One of the things that you said earlier was really interesting, which is like, um, have some sort of recorded sessions to go along with a live classroom. So it's not a complete Coursera, it's not
Right.
a complete live classroom, it's somewhere in between. How do you envision that in your classroom? Like, if you had to just put something out there, forget about the technology, think that everything is possible from a technical perspective.
Hmm.
How would you structure that?
uh I mean, like, I think the discussion once a week is
Will be live.
good.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and like the recorded parts, originally I was sort of like, oh, I'll just like record my whole lecture.
Mm-hmm.
um but when I heard from other people and some feedback from the students, uh, is that like shorter videos are better, because in a live classroom it's easier to sustain your attention for longer. Like it doesn't, if you
I
go
see
to
what you mean.
class,
Yes, yes, yeah.
if you go to class and you're sitting in the chair, like there are just fewer distractions, and there's a bunch of other people that are all paying attention to this guy at the front, and this guy at the front is, you know, uh, being active and moving around and like responding to the energy in the room. So like it doesn't take as much conscious sort of willpower to be like, pay attention, pay attention, pay attention. Whereas if
Yeah.
you're watching something on a screen, like, oh, you might check your email or whatever, like it just takes a lot more effort to pay attention. Because it takes so much more effort, it's like,
You want to make it as easy as possible for them.
right, you want to make it a little easier, so you make shorter videos, because then okay, they can take a break or whatever. Or just like having shorter videos creates a sense of progress.
Mm-hmm.
Like you're like, oh, there's, you know, I finished one, I finished another one, I finished another one, in a way that like, oh, I am 1/3 of the way through a, you know, hour long lecture doesn't get you.
Like a breadcrumb. Oh, that is so good.
Yeah.
It's
So
almost like a progress bar, like this much time
exactly.
left.
No, it is exactly like a progress bar. That, and I think Coursera
Wow.
does that well too, of like a lot of their videos, and it shows you like, oh, this week's lesson is like, 7 parts or whatever, and this one 8 minutes, and this one 12 minutes or whatever. And I think it also helps with student learning, because if they're sort of well labeled and like maybe annotated or tagged with notes, they might want to rewatch a specific part, or it just like creates a little bit more context for it. Because like if you went to a lecture, the professor would create the context of like, you were talking about one thing and then you would transition into another thing, whereas like if you have to click on something or you were distracted, interrupt, like the sort of the meta information about it, like the title and the subject and the tag would have to provide a little bit more about like what you're getting into or whatever. So I would probably say, so I still had the same, basically I had 2 lectures that are an hour and 20 minutes a week, is the class plus the discussion section. So I would sort of just do the same thing, but like I would just stop the recording after 20 minutes or 30 minutes, wherever it felt right. And then I would like, and then do it again. So like each lecture would have like 3 or 4 parts to it.
So it's like a certain part is live, the second part is like a video, then there's a live, then there's a video. Or is it asynchronous? That means there's a live part and then there is
like, for this week has like 8 videos for you to watch. And you should watch all of them before the live discussion thing, so that you can do the activities and learn the thing, and then when you have a discussion, then you can actually you've watched the videos. And some of the live discussion is preparing you for like next week's videos or whatever, but like I think basically it's important in the live discussion to know what information have they watched already.
Correct.
And I think it's a bit difficult. It would be a bit difficult to have too many live discussions, because everyone has to flip, schedules, has to align their schedules for that.
These videos, are these videos that you're recording of yourself telling a story, or these are public, like YouTube kind of videos that you're?
Oh, I do have some, like when I was teaching the class regularly, I had, reading assignments, and those reading assignments were sometimes from my book, or like a scientific journal article, or like a blog post that someone wrote, or like a TED Talk or a video. So and that would just be like their reading assignments. So I'd be like, oh, watch this TED Talk. But that wasn't like for the in-class stuff. But I guess if you're doing it, if it's all digital, you could probably incorporate, some of it. But my lectures are like, I record it on Zoom actually, just so like I have, my slide and my face up there, because when it's just the slide for too long, like I think it loses, like
people
it
get
just feels
bored.
like right.
Yeah.
But it's like there's at least someone's face, then it feels more like someone's talking to you. And I think one of the things I've noticed about Coursera that's helpful is like, sometimes it's like full screen, the professor just talking to you, and then it jumps to like, oh, there's slides, and the slides change and their faces up, and like it sort of helps with engagement, that like visually it's not the same thing, in the way that if you were filming something, you would film it from one angle, and then then you would shoot it from another. Like it just visually is more interesting and engaging.
So these reading materials and all of that, I have a hard stop at 2. I'm sorry.
Well, I have a hard stop because my son just woke up and started crying.
Oh, that's fine. Both of us have a hard stop then.
Yeah. Sorry, you have one more.
Yeah. What do you think? So when you give these reading materials and videos for like students to read, like, I don't know what percent of them actually go through that material and all of that. What do you think about, like, if a class is for, let's say, an hour or like 45 minutes, you reduce that time to like say 30 minutes or 20 minutes of like lecture time or something like that, and then you have the first part of it, have students still kind of log in but like they're essentially like going through a progress bar of all of these materials that you've set out for them. So when they land into a classroom, you know that they have, at least in some capacity, gone through it.
Right. I mean, it's like I've thought about that. Like they land into the live discussion. I've thought about that, and I guess like it would
And it's not
sort of depend on how
asynchronous.
much.
Yeah, it's
Right.
synchronous. That means everybody completes it and everybody starts at the same time. So you have like 20 minutes.
But if
This
you're
is the
like,
material that your professor has set out for you. Go
right.
through it. You have 20 minutes. At the end of 20 minutes, you'll be in the classroom.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's fine. I was like thinking about that for my course
Mm-hmm.
that I'm teaching with these 7 people over Zoom. I was like, oh, I could just give my lecture
Mm-hmm.
live with all of them, and I'm lecturing, and
Mm-hmm.
then we just at the end, when we stop that,
Mm-hmm.
we have a discussion.
Mm-hmm.
But but like then I was like, I have more lecture than just 20 minutes.
Yeah.
So, hi Henry.
I'm gonna let you go.
Yeah, but I was just saying, I have more lecture than just that, and I was like, it's easier to just have students watch it at their own time. I guess it
I
sort of
see.
depends on the amount of recorded, like the ratio of recorded to live. Because if it's
Yeah.
just if you have 20 minutes or half hour of recorded, or even 1 hour recorded and 1 hour live, okay, that maybe makes sense. But if it's like I have 2.5 times the recorded material
Yeah,
and have
that does
live,
not make sense.
then it
Yeah,
doesn't
that
make
has to
sense
be
to just
asynchronous. Yeah.
lead into it.
Yeah.
And but some of it's also like the engagement in the material, like because I don't think you can have people read something at the same time. But if you had like, oh, you watch this TED talk and then you watch whatever, and if it's like sort of engaging and short, then yes, you could have it. Like it would be
Yeah.
all like sort of one event.
Yeah. Yeah. This was super useful, Dr. Korb. Like
You're
I'll
welcome.
spend some cycle time thinking about this, and I would love it if you can, if you have like any person who I should be talking to who holds like these kinds of classes, but let's say a little more technical, that um, requires more of this interaction and all of that. If you have any people
Right.
like that, love to talk to them. I
Okay.
definitely think there's something in the space to be done. Just need to like uncover what that is.
Right. Sure.
Thank
Okay.
you so
Well, it's
much.
good talking to you. Have
It
a
was
good one.
great talking to you too. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye bye.